You think this is funny? Claire Walker's voice cut across the briefing room like a blade. Every operator froze. She snatched the patch from her brother's hand, the worn black fabric, the faded stitching, the two words he had just mocked in front of his entire team, and she held it against his chest. 6 years, she said quietly. 6 years I carried this. You know how many men came home because of what this call sign represents? Ethan said nothing. Neither do you, Claire said, because you never once asked. The room went absolutely silent. And that silence was the beginning of everything. The patch wasn't even new. That was the first thing anyone noticed. The black fabric was worn at the corners, the stitching slightly faded, the kind of wear that comes not from display, but from years of quiet daily use. Someone had carried that patch. Soldiers carry photographs, not because it was required, but because it meant something private and unbreakable. The word across it was 2 syllables. Ghost, actual. Commander Ethan Walker held it between 2 fingers like a piece of evidence at a crime scene. He turned it once, turned it back, let the room see it. And then he looked at his sister. Dr. Claire Walker, 34 years old, intelligence specialist, 12 years working in classified analysis for organizations most people never heard of, and he smiled the smile of a man who believed he already knew everything about someone. Ghost actual, he said, drawing out each word the way a teacher draws out a wrong answer on a chalkboard. Seriously, Claire? It wasn't a question. Claire stood near the back of the briefing room at Camp Valor, her go-bag on the floor beside her left foot, her hands loose at her sides. She had driven 4 hours through the night to be here. She hadn't slept. She had spent the last 18 hours reviewing intelligence packages that none of the operators in this room had been cleared to read. And she had walked through that door knowing exactly what kind of reception was waiting. Some people prepare for humiliation. They build armor. They rehearse responses. They sharpen their words into weapons. Claire didn't do any of that, because armor is heavy, and she had learned long ago that the people who truly don't need your approval are the ones who never needed you to give it. It's my call sign, she said quietly. I've had it for 6 years. Ethan set the patch down on the briefing table with a small deliberate click. Around him, 5 of his most experienced operators men, with more deployments between them than most officers had service years, were watching. Not because they hated Claire. They didn't even know Claire. They were watching because their commander was performing, and when your commander performs, you become his audience. That's how authority works in rooms like this. The strongest voice sets the temperature. Everyone else adjusts. Ghost. Actual sounds like a call sign someone gives themselves when they want to sound dangerous. Ethan said, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man who had never once in 15 years of combat service been made to feel small in a professional setting. No offense. Some offense, Claire said. A few of the operators shifted. One of them, a big broad-shouldered Master Chief named Harlan Brick Mercer, who had served with Ethan for 7 years and trusted his judgment above almost anyone alive, made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Might have been something else. Ethan crossed his arms. He was still smiling, but there was something underneath the smile now, something that happened when he was surprised and didn't want to show it. He hadn't expected her to push back. In his memory, Claire never pushed back. In his memory, Claire was the girl who sat at the kitchen table doing homework while he told stories about football practice. She was the one who cried at the airport when he deployed the first time and made him promise to come back. He had always come back. He had always come back as the hero of the story. It had never occurred to him to ask what kind of stories Claire was living while he was gone. "I'm not trying to insult you," he said, shifting his tone slightly. Still light, still in control, but with a layer of older brother conciliation added beneath it. "I'm just saying Ghost Actual is a tactical call sign. It's a battlefield designation. It implies command presence, forward operating experience, direct engagement authority." He paused. "You're an analyst, Claire. A brilliant one, I'm sure. But this is SEAL Team Phantom 6. These men have—" "I know what these men have," Claire said. The room temperature changed. It wasn't loud. She didn't raise her voice. But something in the quality of how she said it, 4 words completely flat, completely without performance, made 3 of the 5 operators stop moving. Brick Mercer, who had faced down enemy combatants in 4 different countries without flinching, found himself suddenly very interested in the floor. Ethan's smile didn't disappear, but it changed shape. Claire, Master Chief Mercer, 2 Purple Hearts, knee surgery 18 months ago, returned to full duty in 9. Specialist Yates, sniper certification 3rd in his class, currently ranked 2nd in the team for confirmed long-range engagements. Lieutenant Chen, explosive ordnance 2 years at the Joint Special Operations Command attached to Intelligence Fusion. She paused. Lieutenant Reyes, 9 deployments. Lost his spotter in Kandahar in 2019, carried the man's tags for 8 months before his wife asked him to stop because it was hurting him to remember that way. He started keeping the tags in his locker instead. He still looks at them every morning. The room was absolutely silent. Reyes, who was leaning against the far wall with his arms folded, had gone completely still. His jaw was set. His eyes were locked on Claire. He said nothing. Claire looked at her brother. "I know these men," she said simply. "I've been reading about their lives for 3 years. Not because it's required. Because when I'm the one deciding what intelligence goes into a mission package that puts them in a room with armed enemies, I want to know who I'm responsible for." Ethan said nothing. For the first time since he'd picked up that patch, he didn't have an answer ready. "The call sign is mine," Claire said. "I earned it, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't mock it in front of your team." She picked up the patch from the briefing table, returned it to the outside pocket of her go bag, and looked at her brother with the steady, unbothered calm of someone who had already had this fight 100 times in her head and won it every time. "Can we talk about Operation Black Horizon now?" Ethan Walker had been a SEAL for 15 years. He had been Claire's brother for 32. And in all that time, he had never been certain which role was more defining, not for him, but for the space between them. He loved his sister. That was never in question. He had called her from classified locations to hear her voice on her birthday. He had kept a photograph of the 2 of them. Claire at 14, Ethan at 19, standing in front of their parents' house the summer before he left for Buds in every kit bag he'd ever packed. She was the last person he thought about before certain operations. Not because he was afraid of dying, but because she was the clearest image he had of what it felt like to be home. But love, Ethan had learned in the years since their parents died, is not the same as understanding. Love is what you feel. Understanding is what you build. And building requires time, attention, and the willingness to look at someone as they actually are, rather than as you need them to be. Ethan needed Claire to be the person he'd left behind. Because if she had changed, if she had grown into something he didn't recognize, then the distance between his deployments and his real life was larger than he could calculate. And that was terrifying in a way that no enemy combatant had ever been. The mission briefing for Operation Black Horizon was scheduled for 0800. At 0747, Claire was already at the analysis station. In the corner of the room, 3 screens open, headset around her neck, a thermal mug of coffee at her elbow that had been there long enough to be cold. She worked the way she always worked, quietly, completely, without any of the visible urgency that most people displayed when they wanted to be noticed. Nobody asked her anything for the first 14 minutes. Then, Lieutenant Chen looked up from the tactical map and frowned. "Something's off with the eastern grid." Claire didn't look up. "The movement pattern on the eastern grid has repeated with less than 8-second variance for the last 72 hours. Chen paused. "That's actually good, right? Means they're predictable." "It means they want to appear predictable," Claire said. And now she did look up, and Chen found himself meeting eyes that were doing something his analysts back at JSOC called the deep read, a quality of focus that made you feel like you were being processed rather than observed. Real operational security has variance. Real patrols adjust based on conditions, personnel rotation, fatigue cycles, weather. This pattern has no variance. 0. For 72 hours. What does that tell you? It tells me someone built this pattern for us to see. Chen was quiet. On the other side of the room, Ethan was talking with Brick Mercer about extraction protocols. But he heard that sentence. He heard it the way you hear something in a crowded room when your name is in it, a specific frequency cutting through noise. He didn't turn around. Not yet. The official intelligence package for Operation Black Horizon was assembled by a 3-person analysis team at a regional operations center. It had been reviewed by 2 senior officers. It had been signed off by a deputy director who had 40 years of combined intelligence and military experience. It was wrong. Not accidentally. Not because of oversight or missing data, or the simple fog of war that good soldiers account for in every plan. It was wrong because someone had made it wrong. Claire found the first anomaly at 08:23, 16 minutes into the formal briefing. She didn't interrupt Ethan. She circled the data point in red on her secondary screen and cross-referenced it with a separate dataset she had pulled from an archive that wasn't technically part of the official mission package. The archive was something she maintained independently, a habit developed over years of working cases where the official intelligence was the last place you found the truth. The first anomaly was a communication frequency. It appeared in the mission package as belonging to the enemy command network. They were targeting a hardened facility inside a mountain region, heavily protected, isolated enough that extraction would be difficult, regardless of how the assault went. The frequency was logged as active, consistent, high volume. Exactly what you'd expect from an active enemy command node. But Claire had seen that frequency before. Not in an enemy context, in a friendly one. 3 years ago, she had worked a signals intelligence case involving a civilian communications infrastructure in the same regional area. A relay network. Medical coordination, emergency services, civilian government functions. Non-military. Protected under international agreements. And that frequency, the one logged in the mission package as an active enemy communications node, matched the relay network signature with a 94.7% confidence overlap. Claire sat very still for approximately 11 seconds. Then she pulled up a second cross-reference. And a third. By the time Ethan finished presenting the extraction timeline, she had confirmed it 4 separate ways. The target in the mission package was not an enemy command node. It was a civilian communications center. Someone had deliberately encoded a civilian infrastructure signature as a military target and sent SEAL Team Phantom 6 to destroy it. Commander Walker. Ethan paused mid-sentence. The room turned toward Claire. She was standing now, both hands flat on the analysis station, her posture carrying the specific quality of someone who has just confirmed something they hoped was wrong. "The mission package is compromised," she said. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan looked at her for 1 full second before responding. In that second, she watched something happen behind his eyes. A rapid, complex sequence she recognized from years of reading people under pressure. First dismissal, the automatic reflex, then calculation. He was remembering what she'd said earlier about the Eastern Grid. Then, resistance. Because accepting that the mission package was wrong meant accepting a much larger and more dangerous conclusion. "Explain," he said. His voice was flat. Military flat. The tone that means I am listening, and I am not yet committed to believing you. Claire walked him through it. She was efficient. She didn't over-explain. She didn't use qualifiers or hedge. She laid out 4 data points, 3 cross-references, and 1 conclusion, and she did it in under 4 minutes, which was faster than most trained briefers could have managed the same information. When she finished, the room was quiet again. Brick Mercer spoke first. "If she's right." "She's right," Ethan said. And the way he said it immediately, without visible deliberation, told Claire something she hadn't expected. He hadn't needed to verify. He had understood the logic of her presentation the moment it finished. He had just needed 4 seconds to accept that the logic was coming from her. That stung more than the patch comment. "If the target is wrong," Lieutenant Chen said slowly, "then the whole package is wrong." "Not wrong," Claire said. "Designed." She looked around the room. Someone built this package to send this team to the wrong location at the wrong time. Which means someone knew this team would be assigned to this mission. Which means, "We have a source problem," Ethan said. The phrase hung in the air like smoke after a detonation. A source problem. In the world of special operations intelligence. A source problem is not a planning failure. It's not an oversight. It's a betrayal. Someone inside the system feeding bad information, outward engineering outcomes for people on the other side of a very specific line. It meant someone had tried to use Phantom 6 as a weapon against civilians. It also meant, almost certainly, that someone was watching to see if they succeeded. Ethan cleared the room of non-essential personnel within 60 seconds. He kept his core team Claire and the senior communications officer, a quiet young specialist named Daria Vasquez, who had served 3 tours and understood how to keep her expression neutral under pressure. "What's the real target?" Ethan asked Claire directly. "I don't know yet." "Best guess." "Not yet." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Claire, if I give you a best guess and we act on it and I'm wrong, people die." She met his eyes without flinching. "Give me 2 hours." He gave her 90 minutes. She used 83. What she found working backward from the false target was a redirection architecture, a layered set of deliberate misdirections embedded in the mission package, each one designed to lead analysis away from a specific geographic and operational area. Each misdirection was subtle. Each one alone was defensible. Together they formed a pattern as clear as a lit runway. Someone desperately did not want anyone looking at a specific communication relay station. 62 kilometers from the false target. Claire found 3 independent signals pointing to that station. Then a 4th. Then she found the actual enemy activity, not the manufactured kind, but the kind you find when you know where someone is trying not to be seen. "There's a classified relay station," she said when she brought Ethan back in. 62 kilometers northeast. It's a joint-use facility military intelligence infrastructure, sharing a housing with civilian emergency coordination systems. If someone attacks it or successfully disrupts it, they destroy military communications capacity in the entire region and disable civilian emergency services simultaneously. She paused. "And if they can make a U.S. Special Operations team look like the attackers, it's not just the station," Ethan said. "It's the attribution," Claire said. "Yes." Brick Mercer said something quiet and profane. "How long has it been in the mission package?" Ethan asked. "I don't know when the corruption was introduced, but it was built carefully. This took time." Claire looked at her brother. Whoever did this had access, high-level access, and enough time to do it right. Meaning it could have gone into the package at any level. Yes, meaning we can't verify through standard channels. Not without tipping off whoever built this that we found it. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I was looking at the tactical map. Then he looked at Claire. "How confident are you?" "Confident enough that I'm telling you," she said. "I don't say things like this when I'm unsure. You of all people should know I've never asked for more than what I could prove." It was the most personal thing either of them had said since she walked through the door. Something shifted in Ethan's face, small and fast, the kind of movement that most people would have missed. But Claire had been reading her brother's expressions for 32 years. She knew the difference between the face he showed his operators and the face he kept for himself. He believed her. "All right," Ethan said. He looked at his team. "Operation Black Horizon is suspended. We're building a new mission." It took 4 hours. 4 hours of Claire working with Vasquez on signals with Chen, on approach routes with Brick Mercer, on contingency extraction, and with Reyes, who hadn't spoken directly to her since the moment she recited the story of his spotter's tags on threat assessment for the relay station. Reyes came to her at the 2-hour mark with a question about the eastern perimeter. He asked it the way soldiers ask questions of specialists. They're not sure about yet. Carefully technically, in a tone that contained its skepticism, inside the words, rather than around them. Claire answered it. Then she asked him a question back, not about the mission. About the 9 days he'd spent in isolation in Kandahar, in 2019, when his communication with his team had been cut, and he'd had to navigate back to friendly lines, using only terrain features and the stars. Reyes looked at her. "That's in my file. Your field report. I read it twice." She paused. "How did you know which stars to use?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Southern Cross. My grandfather taught me. Your grandfather was Navy. Coast Guard, Reyes said. And something in his voice changed just slightly. The carefully maintained professional skepticism softened at one edge. He used to say the sky is the same everywhere you go. Only the ground changes. That's a good thing to know, Claire said. Yeah, Reyes said. He was quiet for another moment. It really is. By the time Ethan called the team together for the revised mission brief, the room felt different than it had at 0800. Part of it was the information. Part of it was the hours of work. Part of it was something harder to name, the specific quality of tension that develops in a group of experienced operators when they realize the danger they almost walked into, and when they're simultaneously forced to confront who stopped them from walking into it. The person who stopped them was sitting at the analysis station with cold coffee and a worn black patch on the side of her go bag. Ethan presented the revised mission. He credited the intelligence assessment clearly by source by analyst. Dr. Claire Walker identified the package corruption, he said. The revised target is based on her analysis. If she's wrong, we'll know it quickly. If she's right. He paused. If she's right, we were 24 hours away from being used as a weapon against the people we're supposed to protect. Nobody laughed. Nobody made a sound. Brick Mercer looked at Claire once direct, unflinching the look of a man recalibrating. Not apologizing yet, just recalibrating. There was a difference, and Claire understood it. Real operators didn't give easy apologies. They gave something harder, they changed how they acted. That was worth more. Questions about the intel assessment? Ethan asked. One of the younger operators raised his hand. Ma'am, the frequency overlap you identified. Is it possible that it's coincidental, that the civilian signature is just noise in the enemy data? Possible, Claire said. 0.4% probable. Given 4 independent confirming signals. He lowered his hand. Ethan looked at Claire across the briefing table. He wanted to say something. She could see it, the older brother impulse, the need to acknowledge what was happening without making it larger than the moment allowed. The room was watching. The mission was active. This was not the time for a conversation about the space between siblings who had loved each other from a distance for too long. He said, "Good work." It was insufficient, and he knew it. Claire knew it too. But she also knew that some distances don't close in a sentence. They close over time through the weight of repeated moments, through the slow and honest work of two people deciding to actually see each other. They had just started that work. Ready to proceed? Ethan asked her. Claire picked up her headset. This is Ghost Actual, she said. Ready. And in the briefing room of SEAL Team Phantom 6, not a single person laughed. What nobody in that room understood yet was this. The false mission package was only the first layer. Whoever had built it was watching. And when they realized Phantom 6 hadn't moved toward the false target, when they saw the team go quiet, go dark, go off, the expected timeline, they would understand that the corruption had been found, and they would act. The mission that was about to begin was not just a rescue of a communications relay station. It was a race. Claire knew it. She'd known it from the moment she found the 4th confirming signal, the one that told her this architecture wasn't built to misdirect once. It was built to misdirect repeatedly, to adjust to respond. Someone on the other side of this was very good. And they had not yet shown everything they had. She put the headset on. She looked at the screens. And she started working. The new mission had a name before it had a plan. Ethan called it Operation Black Correction. An informal designation, not logged, not filed, not transmitted through any channel that touched the system that had already betrayed them once. He wrote it on a physical notepad with a pen, tore the sheet off, and folded it into his breast pocket. Old school. The kind of operational security that predated satellites and fiber optics and the elegant invisible architecture of digital betrayal. Claire noticed. She didn't comment on it, but she noticed. There are 2 kinds of commanders in special operations. The first kind trusts the system because the system has never failed them personally. The second kind trusts the system until it fails, and then they trust themselves. Ethan Walker had just crossed from the first category into the second in the space of 83 minutes, and Claire understood exactly what that crossing cost a man like him, not just tactically, but psychologically. 15 years of operating inside a structure that he believed in, that he had given his body and his sleep and his relationships to. And now he was holding a folded piece of paper in his pocket because he couldn't be certain the digital record was clean. That was a weight she recognized. She had been carrying it for years. "Vasquez," Ethan said to his communications officer. "Everything from this point forward goes through the backup net. Independent encryption. Nothing touches the primary relay." Daria Vasquez was 29 years old, 3 tours, and possessed a quality that Claire had identified in the first 4 minutes of working with her. She processed information without visible reaction, cataloged it, and responded to the operational need without editorial comment. She was, in short, exactly the kind of person you wanted beside you when everything else was on fire. "Copy that," Vasquez said, and her hands were already moving. Brick Mercer looked at Ethan. "If we go dark on the primary relay, whoever built that package is going to know we found it." "They're going to know anyway," Claire said without looking up from her screen. "The moment we didn't move on the false target, the clock started. They're watching for our response. Going dark on primary doesn't alert them, it just stops giving them real-time information about what we're doing." Mercer looked at her, then at Ethan. "She's right," Ethan said. Mercer nodded once, slowly. The kind of nod that means I'm not convinced yet, but I'm listening, and in Brick Mercer's personal vocabulary, that was practically a standing ovation. Claire kept working. The relay station, 62 kilometers northeast, had a designation in the official database, Communications Infrastructure Node, 7 or CIN7. On paper, it was a maintenance facility for regional signal amplification. Unremarkable. The kind of installation that appears in logistics manifests and budget allocations, and never once in an operational briefing, because nothing that sounds that boring ever becomes a target. Except CIN7 wasn't boring. It was the backbone. Claire had spent 40 minutes of her 83 pulling the actual architecture of what CIN7 supported, and what she found was the kind of thing that makes experienced intelligence analysts sit very still and recalculate the size of the problem they're looking at. CIN7 ran backup communications for 11 forward operating positions in the region. In the event of primary network failure, satellite disruption, electronic warfare, physical infrastructure attack, those 11 positions went to CIN7. They had no other redundancy. It was built that way years ago when the budget for regional communications infrastructure was cut, and nobody had updated the architecture since, because the primary network had never failed, and bureaucracies don't fix things that aren't visibly broken. But there was something else. CIN7 also supported a civilian emergency coordination network. Hospitals, emergency response units, the kind of infrastructure that in a crisis situation becomes the difference between organized response and complete collapse. 47 civilian facilities depended on CIN7 for backup emergency communications. Military on one side, civilian on the other. One node connecting both. And someone wanted to destroy it in a way that looked like an American special operations strike. The implications of that cascaded outward fast. 11 forward positions going blind simultaneously. 47 civilian facilities losing emergency communication. And the footage, because there would be footage, there was always footage showing U.S. operators at the point of attack. "This isn't just sabotage," Claire told Ethan when she laid it out. "This is an event. Something designed to produce a specific international response. The destruction of CIN7 is the visible part. The attribution is the weapon." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "How long do we have?" "I don't know, but they built this package weeks ago minimum, which means they've been planning the actual attack for at least that long. And now that we haven't moved on the false target, they accelerate," Ethan said. "They accelerate," Claire confirmed. Lieutenant Chen, who had been listening from across the room, said, "So we're not just trying to protect the station, we're trying to get there before they do, without them knowing we know where we're going." "Yes," Claire said. Chen exhaled slowly. "Fantastic." Ethan made the decision to move at 1400 hours. He briefed his team in 11 minutes, concise, precise, the kind of briefing that gives experienced operators exactly what they need and trusts them to fill the rest with training and judgment. He presented the revised target, the timeline, the contingency options, and the intelligence assessment. He said Claire's name 3 times in 11 minutes. Each time he said it, something shifted fractionally in the room, an almost imperceptible recalibration in the attention of the operators, a slight redirection of professional regard. Not deference. Not yet. But the beginning of the thing that comes before deference, when experienced people begin to quietly revise a prior assessment. After the briefing, Reyes found Claire at the analysis station. "One question," he said. "Go ahead. The 4 confirming signals you found. The ones that pointed to CIN-7. He paused. "How long had those signals been there?" Claire looked at him steadily. "At least 3 weeks, probably longer." Reyes was quiet. "Whoever built the false package," he said slowly. "They put the breadcrumbs to CIN-7 in there from the beginning." "Yes." "Why would they do that if they wanted to hide the real target?" "They didn't hide it well enough," Claire said. "Or they didn't expect someone to look the way I look." She paused. "Or, and this is the possibility that concerns me, they wanted it to be findable. By the right kind of analyst, at the right moment." Reyes stared at her. "You think the breadcrumbs are also engineered," he said. "I think it's a possibility I can't rule out," Claire said. "Which is why I cross-referenced 4 independent signals instead of moving on one." Reyes was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "At Kandahar, when I was cut off, I was moving on what I thought was a reliable terrain marker. Turned out the marker had been physically altered. Someone moved it. I read that in your report. Then you know I almost walked into their position because I trusted one signal." He looked at her. "You cross-reference." "Always," Claire said. Reyes nodded. Not the slow, conditional nod of Brick Mercer. A different kind. The kind that means I understand what you do, and I understand that it matters. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He went to gear up. Claire turned back to her screens. And underneath the professional efficiency, underneath the focused analytical calm, she felt something she almost never let herself feel during active operations, a small, precise ache. Because Reyes had just understood something about her work in 4 minutes that her brother hadn't understood in 32 years. And that gap, that specific distance between being loved and being seen, was the loneliest kind of distance there was. The team departed at 14:23. Claire remained at the forward command station with Vasquez maintaining the independent communications net, continuing to process signals intelligence in real time. This was her operational role, not in the field, but ahead of it. Mapping the space the operators were moving into before they arrived, clearing the path, not with weapons, but with information. It was also, she knew, the role that made people like her brother underestimate what she did. Because the work that happens before the crisis is invisible. You only see it when it fails. At 15:01, Vasquez picked up an anomaly in the signals environment. "Ma'am." Her voice was flat and careful, the voice of someone who has found something they don't want to have found. "I've got a secondary transmission on the frequency band adjacent to CIN-7's primary." Claire was at Vasquez's station in 4 steps. "Show me." The transmission was brief. 17 seconds. Encoded. Claire had seen encoding architectures like it before, not commonly, but before. She recognized the structural signature the way a musician recognizes a chord progression. Not the specific notes, but the underlying logic of how it was built. "That's not standard enemy encoding," she said. "No," Vasquez agreed. "That's professional. That's—" Claire stopped. "Ma'am." Claire's mind was doing the thing it did when multiple data points suddenly resolved into a single unwelcome picture. She called it convergence. It felt like standing in a corridor and watching all the doors close simultaneously until there was only one door left and you didn't want to open it. That encoding architecture, Claire said carefully, is consistent with a type used by contracted intelligence services, private sector, not state military. Vasquez turned to look at her. You're saying this operation— I'm saying the people who built this package may not be a foreign state actor, Claire said. They may be contractors, which means they have resources, they have training, and they have plausible deniability in 17 different directions. She paused. And they have been doing this for a long time. The implications reorganized the entire threat picture in the space of a breath. A foreign state actor has goals that are at least theoretically predictable. A contractor has only one goal: the completion of the contract. And that means someone, some entity with money and motive, had specifically commissioned the destruction of Sin 7 and the attribution of that destruction to U.S. Special Operations. I need to reach Commander Walker, Claire said. Primary net is dark per his order, Vasquez said. Backup net. Backup net is— Vasquez paused. Ma'am, the backup net just dropped. Claire stared at the screen. The backup communications net. Ethan's carefully arranged independent channel. The one that was supposed to be untouchable was gone. Not degraded. Not experiencing interference. Gone. Clean. Surgical. Someone had found it and cut it, which meant someone had been listening long enough to map their entire communications architecture, including the backup channel they'd built specifically to avoid being listened to. How long were we on the backup net before it dropped? Claire asked. Vasquez checked. 41 minutes. 41 minutes. Long enough to confirm that Phantom 6 knew about the false package. Long enough to confirm the team was moving. Long enough to know that the window was closing. Claire's hands were completely steady as she reached for the secondary terminal. She had learned steadiness in rooms exactly like this one. Not the steadiness of someone who isn't afraid, but the steadiness of someone who has decided that fear is not currently useful. Vasquez, she said, I need you to build me a tertiary communications channel. Use the emergency civilian relay if you have to. That'll be visible to— Everyone. Yes, I know. Claire looked at her. Do it anyway. Vasquez started building. Claire started thinking. The team was 62 kilometers out, moving toward a target with no communications against an adversary that had just demonstrated the ability to find and kill their backup net in under an hour. Ethan had no idea the channel was gone. He had no idea the threat picture had just expanded by several orders of magnitude, and he had no way to know any of it unless she found a way to reach him. It took Vasquez 19 minutes to build the tertiary channel. In those 19 minutes, Claire did three things simultaneously. She continued to process the signals environment around Sin 7, tracking the secondary transmission, watching for follow-on activity. She rebuilt the threat assessment for the contractor hypothesis, pulling every piece of intelligence she had that was consistent or inconsistent with that explanation. And she drafted a communications package for Ethan, a compressed encrypted summary of everything that had changed since 1423, ready to transmit the moment Vasquez gave her a live channel. 8:15:36. Vasquez said, "Channel's live. 30-second window, maybe less, before it gets noticed." Claire transmitted. She had compressed everything into 47 seconds of encrypted audio. Threat update. Contractor hypothesis. Loss of backup net. Revised timeline assessment. One recommendation. Then she waited. At 15:41, a response came back. 5 words. Ethan's voice, flat and controlled, and carrying underneath its control the specific quality of a man who has just received information that changes everything and is choosing not to let that change his voice. Copy. Ghost actual. Keep working. Claire exhaled. Keep working. It was the most professional thing he had ever said to her. Not his sister. Not the analyst. Ghost actual. She turned back to her screens and kept working. At 558, she found the second layer. She almost missed it. It was embedded in the signals data from Sin 7's perimeter, a pattern so subtle that most automated analysis systems would have flagged it as background noise and filtered it out. It wasn't noise, it was a timing sequence. Specifically, it was the kind of timing sequence used to coordinate a multi-point simultaneous action, not a single attack, but several timed to occur within seconds of each other. Claire counted the sequence intervals. Then she counted them again. Then she pulled up the physical layout of SIN 7 from the database and overlaid the timing sequence against the facility's structural architecture. 4 points. Simultaneous. If you place the right kind of device at each of those 4 points, SIN 7 didn't just go offline. It ceased to exist. And it did so in a way that left a specific kind of forensic signature, one that was consistent with certain types of American military demolition charges. They weren't planning to attack SIN 7. They already had people inside it. The devices were already in place. Claire's hands stopped moving for exactly 2 seconds. Not from fear. From the specific kind of stillness that happens when your brain is processing something so significant that it temporarily requires all available resources and has nothing left for motor function. Then she said, "Vasquez." Her voice was completely calm. "SIN 7 is already compromised. There are pre-placed devices inside the facility. This is not a direct assault operation. This is a detonation waiting for a trigger." She paused. "And I think the trigger is the moment Phantom 6 reaches the perimeter. They want the team on site when it goes." Vasquez had gone very still. "They want Phantom 6 to be the evidence." "Not just evidence," Claire said. "They want them close enough that the forensic picture is unambiguous. American Special Operations team on site at the moment of detonation." She was already building a new transmission package. "Get me the channel again. It's been compromised. Get me any channel, emergency broadcast if you have to. Get me something that reaches Commander Walker before he reaches that perimeter." Vasquez worked. Claire worked. And somewhere 62 kilometers away, Ethan Walker and 5 of his most experienced operators were moving toward a facility that was already a trap. A trap not designed to kill them cleanly, but to use them, to frame them, to turn the most elite unit in their command into the evidence for a war crime that someone else had committed. The clock had just become real. The channel Vasquez built this time was rough, a borrowed civilian emergency frequency, unencrypted, audible to anyone with the right equipment. Completely exposed. The kind of transmission that professional intelligence services could intercept and record and later characterize any way they chose. Claire transmitted anyway. She transmitted in a compressed operational format that Ethan would understand, and most civilian intercept operators would not. A specific linguistic and structural shorthand developed over years of classified communications, the kind of professional language that doesn't appear in any open-source manual. She gave him everything. The pre-placed devices, the 4-point simultaneous sequence, the detonation trigger, the framing operation. Then she gave him the one piece of information she had held back until she was certain. "Ghost actual to Commander. I have a source identification on the contractor encoding. Partial. Enough." She paused for one breath. The encoding signature matches a private intelligence contractor that operates under 3 shell companies. One of those companies appears in the regional contracting database as a logistics support vendor. Another pause. "They have a registered access credential for SIN 7. Someone let them in." She released the transmit button. Vasquez was staring at her. "Someone with legitimate access credentials planted those devices," Vasquez said. "Yes. Which means this isn't just an external attack." "No," Claire said. "It never was." The silence that followed was the kind that exists when people are recalculating the entire scope of a problem and discovering that the problem is significantly larger than the room they're standing in. Then Vasquez said, "If they have access credentials, if someone inside the system is working with them, then the source problem isn't limited to the mission package," Claire said. She said it quietly, without drama, because the truth didn't require drama to be devastating. Someone had been inside for a long time. The false intelligence package, the backup communications, cut the pre-placed devices, the contractor access credentials. None of that happened in a week. None of that happened in a month. This was infrastructure. This was investment. This was a patient, careful, long-game operation conducted by someone who understood how special operations intelligence worked from the inside. Because they were on the inside. Claire sat with that for approximately 4 seconds. Then she pushed it aside, not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered later. Right now, what mattered was 62 kilometers and a team of operators moving toward a building that was waiting to become their obituary. "What's the estimated arrival time at the CIN-7 perimeter?" she asked. Vasquez checked. "Based on their departure en route 40 minutes, maybe 35. And I can't confirm they received my last transmission. No confirmation possible on that channel." Claire looked at her screens. Then she made a decision that she had never made before in 12 years of intelligence work. A decision that crossed a line she had always respected, that separated her role from the operator's role, that maintained the boundary between the people who gathered information and the people who acted on it. "Vasquez," she said, "what's the fastest route to CIN-7 from here?" Vasquez looked at her. For a moment she said nothing. Then, "Ma'am, your operational parameters don't include—" "I know what my parameters include," Claire said. "What's the route?" Vasquez told her. Claire picked up her go-bag. She looked for just a moment at the analysis station, at the screens full of signals data, at the transmission logs, at the work of 12 years, reduced to its essential function in this specific moment. She had spent her entire career being the person who stayed behind, the person whose work was invisible, the person whose value was only apparent in retrospect when you counted the people who came home instead of counting the ones who didn't. She had always accepted that. But accepting your role doesn't mean accepting the moment when your role is no longer enough. "Keep the channel open," she told Vasquez. "Log everything. If this goes wrong, the record of what we found needs to survive even if we don't." Vasquez nodded. Her expression was controlled, professional, but her eyes said something else, something that looked, if Claire was reading it correctly, like the particular respect you feel for a person who chooses a hard thing clearly without pretending it isn't hard. "Copy that, Ghost Actual," Vasquez said. Claire moved. The vehicle Claire commandeered was a support utility truck, not tactical, not armored, not built for the kind of road she was about to take it down. She didn't care. She threw her go-bag onto the passenger seat, pulled the ignition, and drove. 62 kilometers. 35 minutes if the team was moving at standard pace. She had 28 if she pushed. She pushed. The road northeast was the kind of road that infrastructure budgets forgot. Unpaved stretches alternating with cracked asphalt. Blind curves. Elevation changes that the truck's engine protested with every gear shift. Claire drove it the way she processed intelligence, with complete attention. No wasted movement. No second-guessing a decision already made. Her phone was open on the seat beside her, Vasquez on an open line. "Anything from the team?" Claire asked. "Nothing," Vasquez said. "Channel's still dark their end. Keep monitoring." "Copy, ma'am." Vasquez hesitated. The hesitation lasted exactly 1 second, which for Vasquez was practically a speech. "Commander Walker does know you're moving." "I know. When he finds out, he'll be angry," Claire said. "That's fine. Angry means alive." She took a curve too fast, felt the truck's rear end slide corrected without lifting her foot from the accelerator. "What's the signals environment around CIN-7 right now?" Vasquez read her the data. The timing sequence Claire had found earlier was still running steady, patient waiting. But there was something new. A secondary signal, weaker, intermittent. Claire listened to Vasquez describe it, and felt the convergence happening again, that specific sensation of multiple data points collapsing toward a single unwelcome conclusion. "That secondary signal," Claire said. "Is it transmitting or receiving?" A pause. "Receiving." "It's a trigger receiver," Claire said. "Someone's waiting to send the detonation signal remotely. The devices don't go off automatically, someone has to push a button." She did the calculation. "Which means they're waiting for the right moment. They need the team on site and in position before they trigger it. So the devices don't go off until Phantom 6 is close enough to be implicated." "Exactly. Which means we have a window." She pushed the truck harder. A small one. 14 kilometers from CIN-7. Claire's phone signal started breaking up. She had expected it. The terrain in this region was geographically hostile to consistent cellular coverage, which was part of why CIN-7 existed as a relay infrastructure in the first place. The irony of losing communications while racing to protect a communications facility was not lost on her. She noted it and filed it in the category of things she would think about later when later existed. Vasquez's voice came through in fragments. Signal is can you? Say again, Claire said. Movement, CIN7, perimeter 2 contacts. 2 contacts at the CIN7 perimeter, which meant the contractor's people were already there. Not inside the devices were already inside, but positioned outside managing the operation, waiting for Phantom 6 to arrive so they could put their finger on the trigger. Vasquez, Claire said, knowing the signal was failing, knowing this might be the last coherent transmission between them for a while. Log this. 2 external contacts at CIN7 perimeter. Contractor personnel. They have the detonation transmitter. Phantom 6 must not breach the perimeter until those contacts are neutralized or the transmitter is disabled. Say again, do not breach until transmitter is handled. Static. Then Vasquez's voice, thin and breaking. Copy Ghost Actual will relay, if. The line went dead. Claire set the phone down. She drove the last 14 kilometers in complete silence, which was fine, because silence had never frightened her. What frightened her was the very specific calculation she was now running the gap between what she knew, what she could communicate, and what Ethan would do when he reached the perimeter without any of that information. She knew her brother. When Ethan Walker reached an objective, he moved. He had spent 15 years building the instinct that says you don't hesitate at the threshold because hesitation is where operators get killed. It was the right instinct for almost every situation he had ever been in. It was the wrong instinct for this one, and she had no way to tell him. Except one. She was still 4 kilometers out when she heard it. Not an explosion. Not yet. A sound that was almost nothing. The kind of sound that most people's ears discard as environmental noise as wind or distance-distorted machinery. Claire's ears didn't discard it because Claire's ears were trained to hear the difference between things that belonged and things that didn't. It was communication. Short-range radio directional, coming from somewhere between her current position and SIN 7. Not the team's frequency. Not any frequency she'd been monitoring. The contractor's people were talking to each other. She pulled the truck off the road, such as the road was, and stopped. She opened her go bag and pulled out the signals receiver she carried as standard equipment. Compact military grade, the kind of tool that most intelligence specialists used from the safety of a forward command post rather than from a support truck 4 kilometers from an active contractor operation. She found the frequency in 40 seconds. The transmissions were brief and professional, the clipped minimal communication of trained operators who understood that every second of radio time was a second of exposure. She caught fragments, timestamps, position updates, and one phrase repeated twice with the precision of a confirmed order. Team on approach. Confirm final position. 90 seconds. 90 seconds. Phantom 6 was 90 seconds from the perimeter. Claire dropped the receiver, grabbed her go bag, and ran. Chaw. She covered 4 kilometers in 17 minutes. This is not a thing that appears in any personnel file associated with Dr. Claire Walker, Intelligence Specialist, because intelligence specialists don't run 4 kilometers toward active contractor operations carrying field equipment, and therefore nobody had ever had occasion to measure it. But she covered it. Uphill rough terrain carrying 11 kilograms of equipment in 17 minutes. She found the first contractor operative at the 3-kilometer mark. Found is perhaps not the precise word. He found her, or rather he was moving along a patrol line in her direction, and they became aware of each other at almost the same moment at a distance of approximately 20 meters. He was dressed in civilian outdoor gear, carrying a compact radio and a sidearm, and his expression in the moment of mutual recognition was the expression of a professional who has encountered an unexpected variable and is rapidly assessing its threat level. Claire's expression, by contrast, was completely calm. "Don't," she said. He reached for the radio. What happened next is something Claire had trained for, but never previously executed outside of a controlled environment, and she did not think about that distinction in the moment, because thinking about it would have introduced hesitation, and hesitation was not an option. She closed the 20 meters in 3 seconds, stripped the radio from his hand with a motion that her instructor had called economical, and she had always privately called desperate and put herself between him and his sidearm before he had finished processing that she had moved. He was bigger than her, significantly. He outweighed her by at least 30 kilograms and had the physical confidence of a man who had won most of the physical confrontations in his life. He grabbed her arm. She let him because letting him grab her meant he wasn't reaching for the sidearm, and not reaching for the sidearm meant the only thing she had to manage was his grip, which she broke with a technique that causes specific pain to a specific nerve cluster in the forearm and results in involuntary release. He released. She stepped back. "On the ground," she said. "I don't have time to negotiate and I don't need to hurt you further. On the ground." He looked at her. He was breathing hard. His forearm was doing something involuntary that told her the nerve compression had worked the way it was supposed to. He went down on one knee. "Both knees," Claire said. "Hands visible." He complied. She used the zip restraints from her go-bag standard field equipment, always carried, rarely used, and secured his hands to a fixed point behind him. She took his radio, his sidearm, and a secondary device from his vest that she recognized immediately. The detonation transmitter. She held it in both hands and looked at it. Black casing. Rubberized grip. Single activation button protected by a safety cover. Simple. Reliable. The kind of device that a professional uses when they need something to work correctly the first time from a distance. One button. 47 civilian facilities. 11 forward operating positions. 6 SEAL operators framed for a war crime. One button between all of that and the world she was trying to protect. Claire opened the transmitter, removed the battery, and put it in her left cargo pocket. She looked at the contractor operative on the ground. "Second one," she said. "Where?" He said nothing. "I found your frequency," she said. "I heard the 90-second call. There were 2 voices. Where is the second operative?" He looked at her with the flat, evaluating look of a professional deciding what information was safe to give away. "Northeast," he said finally. 40 meters. He has the backup transmitter." Claire had already started moving before he finished the sentence. The second operative heard her coming. She knew he heard her because the frequency she was monitoring on the confiscated radio went briefly active. A single burst transmission. 2 words cut off when she rounded the terrain feature between them, and he saw that the person he was looking at was not his partner. 2 words. She'd only caught the first one. Ghost. And then she was too close for him to finish transmitting. How was faster than the first one? More reactive. He had the backup transmitter in his right hand and his radio in his left. And he had the specific body language of a man who has already made a decision about what he's going to do if this situation goes wrong. She could see his thumb moving toward the transmitter. "Stop," she said. His thumb kept moving. "My name is Ghost." "Actual," Claire said. Her voice was completely level. "I have your partner. I have the primary transmitter. And I have been tracking your communications architecture for the last 3 hours. I know who contracted you. I know how you got access credentials to CIN7, and I know the name of the company that appears in the Regional Logistics Database." She paused for one breath. "You are not going to win this by pushing that button. You're going to end your career, spend the rest of your life in a federal facility, and go down in the record as the man who blew up a civilian communications network. Because the team you were supposed to frame is not in that building. They're behind you." His thumb stopped. He turned. Brick Mercer was 3 meters behind him. 6'4", 240 pounds of SEAL operator who had been in this business long enough that he didn't need to say anything. His presence was the statement. The contractor operative lowered the transmitter. "Smart," Brick Mercer said. Then, Ethan Walker stepped forward, and his eyes went from the operative to the transmitter to Claire, and the sequence of emotions that crossed his face happened too fast for any single one of them to settle. Relief and fury, and something else. Underneath both of those things, something that had been building since the moment he'd picked up a worn black patch and laughed at the person who carried it. "What are you doing here?" he said. His voice was controlled. Completely controlled. The kind of controlled that costs something. "Saving the mission," Claire said. "Same as always." They secured the second operative. Mercer zip-tied him with the efficiency of a man who had done it many times before and handed him to one of the junior operators without comment. Ethan stood in front of Claire with his arms at his sides and the controlled expression of a man fighting between his professional training and every other instinct he possessed. "I told you to stay at the command post," he said. "You told me to keep working," Claire said. "I did. That is not what keep working means." "The backup transmitter is in his right hand," Claire said. "The primary transmitter battery is in my left cargo pocket. The first operative is secured 60 meters southwest. The devices inside CIN-7 are inert." She looked at her brother steadily. "You were 90 seconds from the perimeter when I intercepted the contractor's radio traffic. If you had breached at standard approach pace, the devices would have detonated while your team was inside the blast radius." She paused. "That's what keep working means." Ethan said nothing. Reyes, standing 3 meters to Ethan's left, said it quietly instead. 90 seconds. "Give or take," Claire said. Mercer was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was not his standard evaluation face. It was something that in another context she might have called humility, the face of a man encountering the distance between what he assumed and what was true. "You ran here," Mercer said. It wasn't a question. He'd read her respiration rate, her posture, the physiological evidence of sustained exertion. 4 kilometers, Claire said. "With field gear?" "Yes." Mercer looked at Ethan. Ethan was still looking at Claire. His jaw was set. His eyes were doing the complex thing they did when he was processing something he didn't have an immediate response to. Reyes spoke again. "Commander, CIN-7 is still hot. We need EOD inside to pull those devices." That broke through. Ethan shifted into operational mode, the part of him that was not a brother, not a complicated man standing in front of his sister who had just run 4 kilometers and stripped a detonation transmitter from a contractor operative and delivered it to him in her cargo pocket. The part of him that was a commander with a mission that was half finished and a facility that needed to be cleared. Yates Chen Perimeter Security. Reyes contact EOD through the tertiary channel, have them on approach in 15 minutes or less. He turned to the junior operator holding the second contractor operative. He goes nowhere and says nothing. Then he looked at Claire. "You're with me." She fell into step beside him without a word. Inside CIN-7. The picture was worse than the signals data had suggested, and better than the worst-case scenario, which was the specific balance that experienced operators learn to be grateful for because it means the situation is manageable rather than catastrophic. The devices were professionally placed. 4 of them, exactly where Claire's timing sequence analysis had predicted, positioned at structural points that would have guaranteed maximum damage to the facility's communications infrastructure while producing a forensic signature consistent with American demolition techniques. The contractor team had known what they were doing. They had access, they had expertise, and they had time. What they hadn't anticipated was someone finding their timing sequence in raw signals data and recognizing it for what it was. The EOD team arrived in 11 minutes. While they worked, Claire sat with the extracted signals data from the contractor's radios, cross-referencing it against the encoding architecture she had identified at the forward command post. The picture was assembling itself with the remorseless clarity of a puzzle, where you've found all the edge pieces, and suddenly the interior fills itself in. Ethan crouched beside her. "What are you finding?" he asked. His voice was quiet. Not commander quiet. Something else. "The contractor access credentials were issued 8 months ago," Claire said, "under a logistics support contract. The company name is legitimate. They do real logistics work in 3 other regional areas. But this contract was a vehicle. It was always a vehicle." She pulled up a secondary screen. "And the individual who authorized the credential request, the person inside the system who approved access for a logistics contractor to a military-adjacent communications facility." She paused. "Claire," Ethan said. "I need you to prepare yourself," she said quietly. "For what?" She turned the screen toward him. The authorization record was clear. Date signature block credential approval for CIN-7 facility access under the logistics support contract. Everything properly formatted. Everything properly filed. The kind of paperwork that nobody looks at twice because it looks exactly like every other piece of paperwork. The name in the authorization block was Colonel David Marsh, Ethan's commanding officer. The man who had assigned Phantom 6 to Operation Black Horizon. The man who had signed off on the intelligence package that Claire had identified as corrupted. Ethan stared at the screen. He stared at it for a long time. Claire said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that there are moments when the person beside you needs silence more than they need words. And this was one of those moments. The moment when a man who had spent 15 years trusting an institution discovers that the institution contained something that was never trustworthy, and the discovery doesn't break him, but it changes the specific shape of who he is. Marsh, Ethan said finally. His voice was flat and precise, the voice of a man who has locked every available emotion in a room and will deal with it later after the mission is complete. The credential authorization puts him in the chain, Claire said. It's not the whole picture. We need more to establish full culpability. But it's enough, Ethan said. Yes, he stood up. He looked at the EOD team working across the room. He looked at his operators on the perimeter. He looked at everything he was responsible for: the mission, the facility, the people, the implications of what was now sitting in his sister's signals data. Then he looked at Claire. You knew when you showed me this that I was going to have to act on it, he said. Yes, she said. You knew it was going to be Marsh before you showed me. I suspected. The authorization record confirmed it. And you still showed me. You needed to know, Claire said simply. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, some people wouldn't have shown me. They would have routed it around me, gone to a higher authority directly. You're my brother, Claire said. And you're a good commander. You deserve to know first. She paused. Also, I needed you to believe me immediately without a verification process. And I knew you would. Something moved in Ethan's expression. Because you've known me for 32 years, Claire said. And whatever else was broken between us, you know I don't say things I'm not certain of. Ethan looked at her for a moment. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He reached out and put his hand briefly on her shoulder. Not a performance, not a gesture for the room, just the specific physical acknowledgement of a man who doesn't have the right words yet and knows it. A placeholder. A promise that the words were coming. Then he took his hand back, straightened, and became the commander again. Reyes, he called across the room. Get me a secure line to JSOC. We have a priority report. The EOD team pulled all 4 devices in 43 minutes. Clean work. Professional. The team lead briefed Ethan on each device individually. Construction method, placement, precision, estimated yield. When he finished, he paused and said something that stayed in the room long after he said it. Whoever placed these knew exactly what they were doing, the team lead said. And whoever found the timing sequence before these went off. He paused, looking for the right word. Saved this building, every system in it, and the people who would have been blamed for blowing it up. He looked at Claire when he said it. Not because he knew her. Not because he'd been told to. Just because she was the person in the room who fit the description. Claire said nothing. But across the room, Brick Mercer heard it. And Reyes heard it. And Lieutenant Chen heard it. And each of them separately in the specific private way that experienced operators process things. They're not ready to say aloud, began the recalculation that had been building since the briefing room that morning, since the moment a quiet analyst had told Mercer his service history without being asked, since Reyes had stood in the dark and talked about the Southern Cross. The secure line to JSOC went live at 1847. Ethan reported everything in the precise sequenced manner of a man who has spent 15 years distilling complex operational realities into information that senior officers can act on. He presented the false intelligence package, the contractor operation, the pre-placed devices, the communications architecture, and the authorization record. He said Colonel David Marsh's name clearly, without hesitation, without editorial comment. Then he said something that was not in any standard operational report format. The intelligence officer responsible for identifying and neutralizing this operation was Dr. Claire Walker Ghost, actual forward intelligence advisor to Phantom 6. A pause. Her analysis prevented a staged war crime. Her field action disabled the detonation capability. Her work should be in the record, completely, without reduction. The JSOC duty officer on the other end was quiet for a moment. Then, "Copy, Commander," fully noted. Claire standing 3 meters away and professionally pretending not to hear her brother do the most difficult thing a person in his position can do. Give someone else the credit clearly on the record in a forum that matters kept her eyes on her screens. Her jaw was tight. Not with anger. With the very specific effort of someone who refuses to cry in front of 6 SEAL operators. She won that effort. Barely. At 19:23. Reyes found her outside. She was standing alone, the weight of the last 6 hours sitting on her shoulders in a way she would never let anyone see until the mission was officially complete. She had the contractor's radio in her hand still monitoring, because that was what she did. She kept working until it was done. Reyes stood beside her. I didn't say anything for a moment. In her experience, the operators who were most comfortable with silence were the ones who had spent the most time in situations where silence was the only safe option. Reyes had 9 deployments. He knew how to be quiet. I keep thinking about something, he said finally. What? You told me this morning that you cross-reference, that you never move on one signal. He paused. But you moved on one signal when you drove out here. You didn't have confirmation that your transmission reached us. You didn't have confirmation we hadn't already been warned by some other route. You just moved. Claire looked at him. Yes, she said. Why? She thought about it honestly. Not the professional answer, not the operational rationale, but the real one. The one that existed underneath the analysis and the signals data and the cross-referenced intelligence. Because some of the data you need to make the right decision isn't in the signals, she said. Sometimes it's in what you know about the people involved. She paused. I knew my brother. I knew how he approaches a perimeter. I knew what he would do if he got there without the full picture. Another pause. One signal, but it was the right signal. Reyes was quiet for a moment. The Southern Cross, he said. What? What my grandfather said. The sky is the same everywhere. Only the ground changes. He looked at her. You didn't change what you know. You just applied it to different ground. Claire looked at him. That's, she started. Don't tell me it's a good observation, Reyes said, and there was something in his voice that might have been humor. It'll ruin my reputation. Claire almost smiled. Almost. Thank you, she said instead. Reyes nodded, started to walk back inside, stopped, turned. Ghost actual, he said. Yes. It's a good call sign. He paused. For the record. He went back inside. Claire stood in the dark for a moment longer, the radio in her hand, the signals environment around her, carrying its invisible traffic, the facility behind her intact and functioning, because she had seen something in raw data that nobody else had seen and had done something about it before the window closed. 6 years. 6 years she had carried that call sign, and until today, nobody outside her own team had ever said it the way Reyes had just said it. Like it meant exactly what it was supposed to mean. She put the radio in her go bag. She went back inside. The mission was not finished yet. The secure transport back to Camp Valor took 90 minutes. Nobody slept. That was the first thing Claire noticed when they loaded into the vehicle. The quality of the silence among the 6 operators was different from any silence she had observed in the briefing room that morning. That silence had been the comfortable silence of men who knew each other well, who shared a professional language so practiced it had become ambient. This silence was the other kind. The kind that follows an operation where every person present is separately processing the gap between what almost happened and what actually happened, and finding that gap uncomfortably narrow. Reyes sat across from her. He didn't sleep, but he closed his eyes. Not rest, she knew, but the internal accounting that soldiers do after operations. The private inventory of every decision made and every decision available that wasn't made, running the calculation forward and backward to find the point where things could have gone differently. Brick Mercer sat beside Ethan. At one point, about 40 minutes into the drive, Mercer said something to Ethan in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. Ethan listened, nodded once, said 3 words back. Mercer nodded and said nothing more. Claire watched all of it and said nothing. She was still working. The contractors extracted radio, the signals data from SIN 7, the authorization record with Colonel David Marsh's name on it. All of it was running through her analytical process on the secondary screen of her field tablet, building the complete picture that JSOC would need to act. This was her function. This was the thing she was best at. Not the running across rough terrain, not the stripping of transmitters from contractor operatives. Those had been necessary, and she had done them, and she would account for them if required. But this, the patient architecture of evidence, the reconstruction of a conspiracy from its component parts, this was the work she had spent 12 years perfecting. And what the work was showing her the closer she looked was worse than she had told Ethan at SIN 7. Marsh's authorization record was one node in a network. The contractor company, registered under the name Veridon Logistics, one of 3 shells Claire had identified, had a contracts database footprint that went back 4 years. Not just this region. 3 separate regional areas, each with a different operational profile, each involving some form of access to military-adjacent infrastructure. The operations were spaced patient, each one looking like routine logistics business when examined in isolation. Examined together, they looked like a program. Claire stared at that word when it appeared in her own notes. Not an operation. A program. Something sustained, funded, structured, the kind of intelligence architecture that doesn't get built for a single payoff. The kind that gets built when someone is playing a very long game and has the resources to play it. Which meant Marsh wasn't the architect. Marsh was a node too. Someone above him, or beside him, or in a category of relationship that standard organizational charts didn't capture. Someone had built Veridon. Logistics had recruited or compromised. Marsh had engineered the false intelligence package for Operation Black Horizon and had positioned 4 pre-placed devices in a civilian communications facility to be detonated in a way that would frame American special operations. 1 operation, 1 facility, 1 team. But this was not the first time. Claire found the second instance at 2200 hours 90 minutes after they returned to Camp Valor. A similar false intelligence package 18 months ago, a different regional area, a different team. That operation had been aborted for weather reasons, not because anyone found the corruption, but because an unrelated logistical failure had delayed the deployment past the contractor's window. The devices in that facility had been quietly recovered before anyone knew to look for them. Lucky. 18 months ago, they had been lucky. Today, they had been something else. She sent the second instance to JSOC with a flagged priority notation and then sat for a moment in the empty briefing room, listening to the facility around her settle into its late-night rhythms, and thought about the difference between luck and preparation. Luck runs out. Preparation compounds. She opened a new analysis window and kept working. Ethan found her there at 22:47. He came in with 2 cups of coffee, real coffee, not the thermal mug variety she had been drinking since before dawn, but the kind that someone had made with intention and effort. He set one beside her tablet without asking if she wanted it, and sat down in the chair beside her, rather than across from her, which was a different geometry than the one they had occupied in this room 12 hours ago. 12 hours. The briefing room, where he had laughed at her patch, felt like a different building than the one they were sitting in now. JSOC is moving on Marsh, Ethan said. Tonight. They'll have him in a secure location before 0400. Claire nodded. What about the network above him? That's going to take longer. What you found, the program, the 4-year footprint, they're treating it as a counterintelligence priority. Full investigation, multiple agencies. He paused. They want your full analysis package by 0600. They'll have it by 0400. Ethan looked at her. When did you last sleep? Tuesday, Claire said. When did you last sleep? Tuesday, Claire said. Not a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Something between them. The sound of a man who recognizes a family trait and is simultaneously exasperated by and proud of it. Claire, I'm fine. You ran 4 kilometers with field gear and disarmed a contractor operative and drove an unarmored support truck down a mountain road in the dark, he said. You are not fine. You are functional. There's a difference. She looked at him. You noticed the difference, she said. I notice a lot of things about you, Ethan said quietly. I just didn't always... He stopped. Started again. I didn't always look at what I was noticing. I filed it in a category and left it there. The category was called Little Sister. He paused. That was a failure of attention. It was also something worse. Claire waited. It was arrogance, Ethan said. The word came out carefully, the way words come out when a person has been holding them for hours and is finally allowing them to form. I was so certain I knew you that I stopped seeing you. And in my world, if you stop seeing something clearly, people get killed. He looked at her. You could have been killed today, because I didn't listen to you properly this morning, because I built a picture of you in my head that was 20 years out of date and never updated it. You updated it, Claire said. Not fast enough. You updated it before it was too late, she said. That's what matters. Ethan shook his head slightly. That's a very generous way to look at it. I'm not being generous, Claire said. I'm being accurate. Those are different things. She looked at him steadily. You heard me when it mattered. You trusted my analysis. You made the decision to move on the revised target without the verification process you would normally require. You did that because you decided in the moment to actually look at me. She paused. Most people never do that. Even people who love you. The room was quiet. The late-night facility sounds continued around them. A distant generator, the movement of the duty watch officer in the corridor, the small mechanical sounds of a base operating through the night. Ethan picked up his coffee cup and looked at it for a moment. I called you Ghost Actual on the JSOC report, he said. I heard. I used your formal call sign, not Dr. Walker, not my sister, Ghost Actual. He paused. I should have been doing that for 6 years. Claire said nothing. I want to ask you something, Ethan said. Ask. The call sign, how did you get it? She had not expected that question. Not tonight, not in this room, not with the operation still technically active, and her 0400 analysis package still half-built. But she looked at her brother's face and understood that he wasn't asking as a commander gathering information. He was asking as a person who wanted to understand something he had mocked without knowing what it meant. 4 years ago, she said, there was an operation in a different region, similar structure to today, but smaller. A 3-man team moving toward a target based on intelligence that I had serious concerns about. My concerns were logged. They were reviewed. They were dismissed by the senior analyst on the case. She paused. I went over his head. I requested a 48-hour hold on the operation. It was denied. Another pause. I went over his head again. And again. I worked the problem for 31 hours without stopping. I rebuilt the entire intelligence architecture from raw signals data the way I do, and I found the corruption. Did the team deploy? The deployment was delayed by a logistics issue, Claire said. 12 hours. Enough time for my analysis to reach the right desk. She looked at her coffee cup. The team lead, when they debriefed afterward, when they understood what I had found and what it had prevented, he gave me the call sign. He said I was a ghost because nobody saw me working. Nobody knew I was there. But everyone was alive because I was. Ethan was very still. Who was the team lead? He asked. Colonel Richardson, Claire said. He retired 18 months ago. Ethan looked at the table. Then he looked at Claire. And something in his face, the architecture of a man who had spent 15 years being the most capable person in most rooms, shifted in a way that was not diminishment, but completion. Like a structure that was always functional, but had been missing a load-bearing element that nobody noticed was absent until the day it was put in place. I was wrong about this patch this morning, he said. Yes, Claire said. And I was wrong about you, specifically, for a long time. Yes, she said again. I don't have an explanation that makes that acceptable. I know. I have an apology, he said. Claire looked at her brother. I know you do, she said quietly. I can see it. You don't have to perform it. Ethan exhaled slowly. Claire. Ethan. She said his name the way she had said it since they were children, direct level with the specific warmth of someone who knows a person well enough to bypass the formalities. You showed me what you think of me today, on the JSOC report, in front of your team. That means more than anything you say in this room tonight. She paused. Actions, not words. You always told me that. He had told her that. 14 years ago, the summer before his first deployment, sitting on the back porch of their parents' house. She had been upset about something a friend who had promised one thing and done another. And 19-year-old Ethan Walker, about to become a Navy SEAL, had said, "Watch what people do, not what they say. Words are free. Actions cost something." He remembered telling her that. He had not considered until this moment that she had been applying the standard to him the entire time. You've been watching what I do, he said. Always, she said. And today you did the right thing, Claire said. That's what I'll remember. Ethan picked up his coffee, drank, said nothing for a long moment. Then, the patch, the one I mocked this morning. What about it? I want to know everything it represents, he said. From the beginning, all of it. He paused. If you're willing. Claire looked at him for a moment, then she picked up her coffee. I have until 0400, she said. Ask me what you want to know. The conversation they had between 2247 and 0130 in that briefing room was not about the operation. It was about 12 years of work that nobody outside a classified clearance level had ever seen. It was about the cases that were solved and the ones that weren't, about the intelligence that reached the right desk and the intelligence that was buried by people with agendas, about the analysts who burned out and the ones who didn't, and what the difference was between them, about what it means to carry responsibility for people you will never meet in situations you will never physically enter with tools that most of the world doesn't recognize as tools at all. Ethan listened. This was not a thing he had always done well. He was by nature and by training a person who spoke, who briefed, who commanded, who set the tone and moved the room and made decisions out loud so his team could follow the logic. Listening was not his primary operating mode, but he listened to Claire. He asked questions that were not the questions of a commander extracting operational information. They were the questions of a person who is genuinely trying to understand another person's life. Specific patient. The kind of questions that acknowledge the asker doesn't already know the answer. At one point around midnight, Claire told him about the 31 hours she had worked before the Richardson operation. The way she had rebuilt the intelligence architecture from raw signals data. The moment she had found the corruption and known that she was right and that nobody above her was going to believe her fast enough unless she made them. Were you afraid? Ethan asked. She thought about it honestly. Not of being wrong, she said. Of being right too slowly. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That's the same fear I have on every operation, he said. Being right too slowly. Recognizing the threat after the moment it could have been stopped. Claire looked at him. I know, she said. That's why you're good at what you do. Something crossed his face, surprised recognition. Not the recognition of being complimented, but of being understood. The specific experience of hearing someone name something you carry privately and realizing they have been carrying the same weight. You've always known that about me, he said. I've been watching you do your job for 15 years, Claire said. From a distance. Through reports and mission records, and the things you told me when you called. She paused. You're a good commander, Ethan. That was never in question. But you built a world where the only kind of strength you recognized was the kind you could see, she said. Not harshly, not with the weight of accusation, simply the way she delivered intelligence cleanly, without editorializing. You could see what your operators did. You could measure it, count it, put it in a report. You couldn't see what I did because it happened before the mission started. because it looked like a person sitting in front of a screen, and I assumed sitting in front of a screen was lesser, Claire said. Yes. Ethan set down his coffee cup. I grew up watching our father work, he said slowly. Our father, a man who had been a machinist for 30 years, who had built things with his hands, who measured worth by the tangible evidence of what you had made or fixed or carried. He always said the most important work was the work you could hold. I know, Claire said. I grew up in the same house, but it didn't make you think that way. I watched you instead, she said simply. And I decided I wanted to do something that mattered, even if nobody could hold it. The room was very quiet. Outside the facility, the night continued. Somewhere across Camp Valor, Colonel David Marsh was being quietly escorted from his quarters by people who had received a priority report from JSOC, and the beginning of an accounting was underway that would take months and reach further than either Walker sibling could currently calculate. But in the briefing room, two people who had spent 32 years being family without always being present to each other were doing the slow, essential work of actually arriving. At 0134, Brick Mercer knocked on the briefing room door. He opened it before either of them answered the prerogative of a man who had known Ethan Walker for 7 years and understood that waiting for permission was sometimes the less efficient option. He looked at the two of them. He said, "Marsh is in custody. JSOC just confirmed." "Copy," Ethan said. Mercer didn't leave. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and Claire could see him working through something, the same recalibration she had watched happen incrementally throughout the day, now reaching some kind of completion point. Brick Mercer was not a man who said things he hadn't fully meant, and he was not a man who said things before he was ready to mean them fully. He looked at Claire. "This morning," he said. "Yes." "I laughed." "You did," Claire said. "I laughed because Walker laughed," Mercer said. "And in this team, when the commander sets a tone, everyone defaults to that tone. That's by design. That's how unit cohesion functions." He paused. "But it meant that I took a position on a person I didn't know anything about, based on nothing but a call sign and a patch." He paused again. "Based on nothing but the fact that she was a woman in a room full of operators, and her brother found that funny." The room was very still. Ethan said nothing. This was Mercer's moment, and he understood that. "I've been doing this job for 19 years, Mercer said. "I know better than that." He looked at Claire steadily. "I'm sorry, Dr. Walker. That was beneath the standard I hold myself to." Claire looked at him. Brick Mercer, 2 Purple Hearts, 19 years of service, a man whose professional regard was not given easily and was worth significantly more because of that, was apologizing to her. Not performing an apology. Not offering a qualified acknowledgement of a social misstep. An actual apology from a person who understood what he had done and was taking responsibility for it without excuse. "Thank you," Claire said. "That means something." "I imagine it means something specific," Mercer said. "Given the number of rooms like that one you've probably been in." "More than I've counted," Claire said. Mercer nodded once, then to Ethan. "Reyes and Chen want a brief on the JSOC status when you have a minute." 10 minutes, Ethan said. Mercer left. The door closed. Ethan looked at Claire. "He's never apologized to anyone in the 7 years I've known him," he said. "Not once. Not for anything." "I believe that," Claire said. "He meant it." "I know," she said. "That's why I said it meant something." She paused. "Not everyone does." At 0219, Lieutenant Reyes found the 3rd layer. He had not been asked to look. He had been theoretically off-duty since 2100, assigned to rest rotation in preparation for whatever came next, which in special operations is never as certain as the schedule suggests. But Reyes had a habit developed over 9 deployments of not fully disengaging until the picture was complete. He had spent the last 2 hours doing what soldiers who can't sleep sometimes do. He had been reading the case materials Claire had compiled because something was nagging at him and he wanted to find it. He knocked on the briefing room door at 0219, and when he came in, his face had the look it had on the drive back. The internal accounting look, except now with something added, something sharp. The Veridon Logistics contract, he said without preamble. The regional contracts database. You said the access credentials were issued 8 months ago. Yes, Claire said. I found a billing record, Reyes said. Logistics support routine maintenance, same company name, dated 3 years ago, different facility, same region. Claire was already reaching for the tablet. Send it, she said. He forwarded the file. Claire had it open in 6 seconds. She read it once, then again. Then she set the tablet down with the precise controlled movement of a person keeping a very large reaction inside a very small space. This is a facility I know, she said. Which one? Ethan asked. Claire looked at him. Forward Intelligence Station Kilo 7. It's a small installation. Limited personnel. It primarily processes signals intelligence for regional operations. She paused. It's where my team works when we're deployed in this region. The silence that followed was its own kind of detonation. Veridon Logistics had access credentials to the facility where Claire's team operated. 3 years ago. Before Black Horizon. Before the CIN-7 operation. Before any of the individual events that Claire had been treating as a program. Before Claire had been assigned to this region. The room recalculated in real time. Reyes said it first carefully, the way you say something when you're not certain you want it to be true. They weren't just targeting CIN-7. No, Claire said. They weren't just targeting Phantom 6. No. Ethan's voice was very controlled. Claire. What does Veridon's access to Kilo 7 give them? She didn't answer immediately. Not because she didn't know. Because she was verifying internally the thing she was about to say, running it through the analytical process one more time to be certain before she put it in the room. Kilo 7 processes signals intelligence for regional operations, she said slowly. It also houses the working files for forward intelligence advisors, assessment methods, source networks, analytical frameworks. She paused. If someone had access to Kilo 7 3 years ago, legitimate credentialed access, they could have built a profile, not just of the facility, of the analysts working there. Another pause. Of how those analysts work, what they look for, what they're likely to miss. The implication settled over the room. Someone had studied Claire, not her personally necessarily, but her methods, her analytical approach, the way Ghost Actual worked. And they had built the false intelligence package for Black Horizon knowing those methods were going to be applied to it. Which meant one of two things. Either the package was built to survive Ghost Actual's analysis, built well enough that even her methods wouldn't find the corruption. Or it wasn't. Or it was built to be findable, specifically by her, at a specific moment, in a specific way. Claire said quietly. Ethan looked at her. What? She was very still. The breadcrumbs to CIN-7, she said. The 4 signals I found, the timing sequence, the contractor encoding signature. She paused. I told Reyes this morning that I was concerned those might be engineered, that maybe the real target was meant to be findable. She paused again. I was right, but I had the direction wrong. Explain, Ethan said. Flat. Military flat. The tone that means I need you to be clear right now. The operation wasn't designed to destroy CIN-7 and frame Phantom 6, Claire said. That was a layer, a functional layer. It would have worked if needed. But the primary objective of this operation wasn't CIN-7. She looked at her brother. The primary objective was to generate a threat that I would find, that I would respond to, that would bring me out of the command post and into the field. She stopped. Me. Specifically. Reyes said, why? Claire picked up the tablet, pulled up the Kilo 7 billing record, read the date again, calculated backward. 3 years ago, Veridon accessed Kilo 7, she said. 8 months ago, Marsh issued CIN-7 credentials. Black Horizon was assigned to Phantom 6, my brother's team, 4 weeks ago. She looked at Ethan. You were assigned 4 weeks ago. I was attached to this operation 7 days ago. Someone made sure I was here. Ethan was very still. Someone set this entire operation, he said slowly, to get you into a specific location at a specific time. Not just me, Claire said. But yes, me specifically. She paused. The question is why? What does Ghost Actual in a field location, away from a command post, away from protected infrastructure in an active contractor operation zone? What does that give someone? The answer came to her the same moment it came to Ethan. She saw it in his face, the moment of recognition, immediate and terrible. Your source network, Ethan said. Claire's analytical architecture. Her methods. Her active source relationships. The intelligence infrastructure. She had spent 12 years building the network of human contacts, signal sources, and analytical relationships that allowed her to do the work she did. In the field exposed, potentially compromised in a situation where a contractor operative had already gotten close enough to grab her arm. If something had happened to her at Sin 7, if the operation had gone slightly differently, if the second contractor operative had been faster, if she had arrived at the perimeter 30 seconds later, whatever she carried professionally and operationally could have been extracted, exploited, or simply ended. They didn't want to destroy Sin 7, Reyes said, following the logic. They wanted what she knows, who she knows, how she works. CN7 was the reason she'd move, Ethan said. The only reason Ghost Actual leaves a command post and goes into the field is if there's something she can't solve from the command post. The pre-placed devices, Claire said. A transmitter that needed to be physically intercepted. A timeline that required field action. She set the tablet down. They built a scenario that I would recognize as requiring my direct involvement, and then they positioned people who could intercept me while I was responding to it. The first contractor operative, Mercer said from the doorway. He had come back at some point during this silently, and was standing with his arms folded and his jaw tight. When you stripped his transmitter, he could have... He was bigger than me, Claire said. Yes, I know. If he had been faster. I know, she said again. The room was very quiet. Ethan Walker, who had spent 15 years facing physical danger, with the trained equanimity of a man who has made peace with the possibility of not coming home. Ethan Walker looked at his sister and felt something that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with 32 years of being the older sibling, the protector, the one who was supposed to keep the people he loved safe from the things that wanted to hurt them. He had sent her into this, not directly, not intentionally. But she had come here because this was his mission, his team, his operation, and she had been positioned here by people who knew she would come. And the moment she walked through the door of that briefing room this morning, she had been inside a trap built specifically around what she was. Ethan, Claire said. He was looking at the table. Ethan, look at me. He looked up. I'm here, she said. The trap failed. The operation is complete. She paused. I made the choices that brought me to that field location. I made them knowing the parameters. I'm not a civilian who wandered into something she didn't understand. I'm Ghost Actual. This is what I do. They knew what you do, Ethan said. They built this entire operation around what you do. That means I'm effective enough that someone spent 3 years building a program specifically to counter me, Claire said. That means something. She paused. That also means we now know the program exists. We know its architecture. We have a Kilo 7 access record that's going to unravel the rest of it. She looked at her brother. The trap failed, Ethan, and they lost more than the operation. A long pause. Reyes said quietly, they lost the element of surprise, against the one person who was already going to dismantle them anyway, Chen added from behind him. The room held that for a moment. Then Ethan Walker picked up his radio. Vasquez, he said. Priority update to JSOC. We have a third layer. Expand the investigation to include Kilo 7 access records, 3-year timeline, Veridon logistics. He paused. And flag Ghost Actual as a primary intelligence asset in the program target profile. She's going to need a full security review and an updated operational protocol. Vasquez's voice came back. Copy, Commander. And Sir JSOC is asking if Ghost Actual is available for a direct brief at 0600. Ethan looked at Claire. Claire picked up her tablet. Tell them Ghost Actual will be ready at 5:30, she said. I want 30 minutes before the brief to verify my analysis package is complete. Ethan almost smiled. You heard her, he said into the radio. He set the radio down, looked at his sister at the worn go-bag, the field tablet, the analyst's eyes that had been working for 22 hours straight and showed no sign of stopping. You need to sleep, he said. I need to finish, she said. Claire. Ethan. She looked at him with the steady, unbothered calm that he had dismissed this morning, and now understood as something that had been built quietly, and without his knowledge over 12 years of doing the hardest kind of work alone. I have been finishing things without your help for a long time. Let me finish this one. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stood up. I'll get you more coffee, he said. It was the right thing to say. Both of them knew it. The JSOC brief started at 05:27. Claire had been ready since 05:11. She stood at the head of the briefing room with her analysis package loaded, her voice steady, and 23 hours of continuous operation, sitting somewhere behind her eyes, in a place she had learned to store things that needed to wait. The two senior officers on the secure video link, Brigadier General Patricia Howe and Deputy Director Calvin Rourke from the Defense Intelligence Agency, had the faces of people who had been briefed on the general outline and were now encountering the specific detail for the first time. The specific detail was significantly worse than the general outline. Claire gave them everything. The false intelligence package, the contractor architecture, the Veridon Logistics shell company and its 3 regional iterations, the SIN-7 pre-placed devices, the Marsh authorization record, the Kilo 7 access history, the program timeline running back 4 years, the targeting of Ghost Actual as a primary objective. She laid it out in 31 minutes, without notes, without hesitation, without the qualifier-heavy language that most analysts used when presenting conclusions they weren't fully certain of. She was fully certain. General Howe asked 2 questions during the brief. Both of them were good questions, the kind that cut directly to the structural vulnerabilities in the intelligence chain that had allowed this program to operate for 4 years. Claire answered both without deflection. Deputy Director Rourke asked one question. Dr. Walker, in your assessment, how many operations in this region over the last 4 years may have been affected by intelligence corruption from this program? Claire had run the calculation the night before. Conservatively, she said 17, possibly as many as 23. The ones with clean outcomes may have been lucky. The ones with adverse outcomes need to be reviewed against the Veridon access timeline. She paused. I can have a preliminary review matrix to your office by end of day. Rourke looked at Howe. Howe looked at Claire. Dr. Walker, she said. How long have you been awake? Since Monday, Claire said. A pause. It is Thursday morning. Yes, ma'am. Another pause. Then, with the specific tone of a senior officer who is simultaneously impressed and professionally obligated to be concerned. Complete your briefing package, and then you will sleep. That is a direct request from this office. Understood, Claire said. She didn't say yes, General. She said understood. Because yes implied agreement, and understood implied acknowledgement of the request's existence, which was a distinction that Claire Walker had been making her entire professional life with people who outranked her and were wrong. Ethan, standing at the back of the room, heard it. He recognized it. Because he had heard their mother use that exact tone with their father for 30 years. The tone that meant, I have registered what you said, and I will continue doing what I think is necessary. He had spent his entire life thinking that was his mother's quality. He was looking at it now in his sister, and the resemblance was so precise and so obvious and so completely invisible to him until this moment that he had to look away for a second. The brief ended at 06:01. In the 34 minutes that followed, 3 things happened simultaneously. The first, JSOC activated a counterintelligence team to begin the formal review of the 17 to 23 operations Claire had flagged. The team lead contacted Claire directly requesting her preliminary matrix by 1400 instead of end of day. She said understood. The second, Colonel David Marsh, in a secure holding facility 40 kilometers from Camp Valor, was presented with Claire's authorization record analysis by 2 investigators who had read her full package. He looked at the documentation for approximately 90 seconds. Then he asked for legal counsel and said nothing further, which was itself a form of confirmation to anyone who understood how innocent people respond to evidence of things they didn't do. The third, a name came out of the Kilo 7 access records. Not Marsh. Not anyone from the contractor's operational team. A name that appeared in the facility access log 3 years ago, logged under a legitimate inspection credential, a routine administrative visit. The kind that generates a single line in a database and is never looked at again. Vasquez found it at 0618 while running the expanded search protocol Claire had built. She brought it to Claire without framing it, without interpretation, in the specific professional manner of a communications specialist who understands that some information needs to arrive cleanly without the noise of another person's reaction added to it. Claire read the name. She read it twice. Then she picked up her radio. "Commander Walker, I need you in the briefing room." Ethan was there in 40 seconds. He read the name. The name belonged to a senior official in the Defense Intelligence Agency, not a field operative, not a middle manager, but a person whose position placed him in the oversight structure for exactly the kind of regional intelligence operations that the Veridon program had been systematically corrupting for 4 years. A person who would have known which operations were being planned, which teams were being assigned, which analysts were attached to which missions. A person who would have known that Ghost Actual was being attached to Operation Black Horizon 7 days before it deployed. "He's DIA," Ethan said. "Yes," Claire said. "Rourke's office." "Rourke's office," Claire confirmed. Ethan looked at the access record. His jaw worked once. Then he was still. "Rourke just sat through your entire brief." "Yes." "He asked you how many operations might be compromised." "Yes." I was asking how much I had found," Claire said. Her voice was completely flat. He was assessing the damage, how much of the program was visible, whether the access record had surfaced yet. She paused. It hadn't. At the time of the brief, Vasquez hadn't run the Kilo 7 search far enough back. "I found Marsh's authorization at the 8-month mark. The Rourke access was 3 years ago." Another pause. "He knows we're going to find it. He's known since the brief ended." "Which means he's already moving," Ethan said. "Yes." "How long do we have?" Claire had already calculated it. "He needs to reach someone with authority to interfere with the investigation before Vasquez's search reaches his access record through official channels. Vasquez found it because she was running the protocol I built. He won't know the exact search architecture, so he won't know the precise timeline. But he'll estimate." She paused. 30 minutes. Maybe less. Ethan picked up his radio. He contacted JSOC directly, not through the standard channel, not through any channel that touched Rourke's oversight structure. A back channel, the kind that exists specifically for situations where the standard channel may be compromised. He knew 2 people at JSOC he trusted at the level required for this moment. People he had served with, people whose professional integrity he had observed in situations that stripped away everything but what a person actually was. He reached the first one in 4 minutes. He gave him the name, the access record, and Claire's full analysis in 6. He said one more thing before ending the call. "The source of this intelligence is Ghost Actual. Her analysis is complete and verified. It needs to reach General Howe directly and immediately without touching Rourke's office or anyone in his reporting chain." A pause on the other end. Then, "Copy, Commander. Moving now." Ethan lowered the radio. The room was quiet. Claire was looking at her tablet. Her hands were completely steady. Her face was the analytical face, the deep read, the full processing expression that Ethan had learned in the last 24 hours meant she was running at maximum capacity and had allocated no resources to anything that wasn't immediately necessary. "You're not surprised," Ethan said. "That someone at Rourke's level was involved," Claire said. "No, the program was too sophisticated for Marsh to be the architect. I told you at Sin 7 Marsh was a node. The architecture requires someone with broader access, longer tenure, deeper institutional knowledge." She paused. "I was looking for the right level. This is the right level." "You knew it would be someone like Rourke." "I knew it would be someone inside the oversight structure," she said. The oversight structure is where you place an asset if you want to see everything without being seen. She looked at him. A ghost Ethan. Someone doing something so valuable to the other side that everyone was safer for them because he was there. Ethan looked at her. You just described the call sign, he said. Yes, Claire said. It works in both directions. General Howe's response came at 0704. Deputy Director Rourke was placed on administrative leave pending a counterintelligence investigation at 0711. In the 41 minutes between the discovery of his name in the Kilo 7 access record and his removal from active authority, he had made 2 phone calls. Both were logged. Both were to individuals who were now also being looked at. He had not had 30 minutes. He had had 41, and it had not been enough because the people Ethan had called at JSOC had moved faster than Rourke had calculated they would move. Because Ethan Walker's relationships, the ones he had built over 15 years of bringing his team home, of being the commander who showed up and told the truth, were the human equivalent of what Claire did with signals. A network. Invisible until the moment it was necessary. When Mercer heard about Rourke, he stood in the corridor outside the briefing room for a moment without speaking. Then he said to no one in particular, 4 years. The man sat in oversight for 4 years. Nobody answered, because there was nothing useful to say about it. It was the kind of institutional betrayal that doesn't get smaller when you look at it directly. It gets larger. You see the operations that went wrong. The intelligence that arrived corrupted the decisions that were made by people who trusted the system and were failed by a person inside it. You count the cost. Reyes counted it. Claire watched him do it, standing in the doorway of the briefing room at 0720, very still doing the accounting that soldiers do. He had 9 deployments. He had operated for 9 deployments inside a system that had been compromised in ways and to degrees that would take months to fully map by a man who had sat in a position of oversight and used it as a position of betrayal. How many of my missions? Reyes said. Not a complete question, not asking for a specific answer, just saying the thing out loud because it needed to be said. We don't know yet, Claire said. The review will determine it. But some of them. Possibly. He nodded, slowly. Kandahar, he said. 2019, my spotter. Claire said nothing, because she didn't know, and she wouldn't tell him a thing she didn't know, but she understood what he was asking, whether the operation that had cost him his partner, that he had spent 7 years carrying in his locker, and his memory had been one of the corrupted ones. Whether the loss had been preventable in a way that went beyond the ordinary contingency of combat. It was the kind of question that might never have a clean answer. And not having a clean answer was its own kind of weight. I'm sorry, Claire said, for what's in those files and for what isn't in them, both. Reyes looked at her. You didn't do it, he said. No, but I work in the system that let it happen. She paused. That matters to me. I was quiet for a moment. Then, the review. When it maps the compromised operations, the ones that went wrong for the wrong reasons. He looked at her steadily. Will you make sure the people who were lost in those operations, their families? Will you make sure the record shows what actually happened, that it wasn't just fog of war, that there was a reason that should have been preventable? Claire looked at him. Yes, she said. That is exactly what I will do. Reyes nodded once. The nod she had come to recognize, the full one, the completed one. The one that meant the weight had been acknowledged and witnessed and would not be forgotten. He walked away. Claire sat with what he had asked for a moment. Then she opened a new document on her tablet and started writing the scope of work for the review. At 0900, General Howe called back. She was on a secure line, her voice carrying the specific quality of a senior officer who has spent the last 2 hours having a series of very difficult conversations and is now arriving at the one she chose to make herself. Dr. Walker, she said. General, I've read your complete analysis package, both packages. A pause. Your preliminary identification of the program scope and the Rourke access record. Another pause. I want to ask you something directly. Go ahead, Claire said. The Kilo 7 access record. Rourke's visit was logged 3 years ago under an inspection credential. In your analysis, you concluded that his purpose was to build a profile of forward intelligence advisory methods, specifically your methods. Howe paused. Is it possible that his purpose was something else? That the visit was routine and the correlation to your work is analytical inference rather than confirmed intent? Claire had expected this question. Not because Howe was defending Rourke, the general's tone made clear she was not, but because Howe was doing her job. Testing the analysis. Applying pressure to the conclusions to see where they held and where they might give. It was exactly what Claire would have done. It's possible, Claire said. The visit itself is logistically consistent with a routine inspection. The correlation to my methods is inferential. It requires accepting the premise that someone in Rourke's position, with his access to personnel assignments and operational profiles, would have used a legitimate inspection as cover for a secondary purpose. She paused. That inference is supported by 4 independent data points, including the 4-year consistency of the Veridon program, with regional operations I was assigned to, and the specific construction of the Black Horizon package in a way that was designed to be findable by my particular analytical method. Another pause. Possible that it's coincidental, not probable. I assess 91% confidence on the intent conclusion. A long pause on Howe's end. Then 91. Yes, ma'am. Not 92, not 89, 91. I don't round up, Claire said, and I don't round down. A pause that might have contained something adjacent to a laugh. No, Howe said. I imagine you don't. Another pause. Dr. Walker, I'm going to ask you to lead the formal review of the 17 to 23 flagged operations, not contribute to it. Lead it. Claire was quiet for a moment. That's a significant scope, she said. Yes. It will require a dedicated team, analysts I select, access to records that are currently distributed across 4 agencies. You'll have it, Howe said. And the review needs to be insulated from any reporting chain that passed through Rourke's office. Completely insulated, independent oversight. I'll structure it that way. Then yes, Claire said. I'll lead it. A pause. One more thing, Howe said. Off the record. Understood. How did you find the Rourke connection before my office found it? Claire considered the question. Then, I built the search protocol last night specifically to map the full access history at Kilo 7. I started from the assumption that the program had more layers than Marsh represented, that the architecture was too sophisticated for a single node. I was looking for the level above. She paused. And I had a good communications specialist who ran the search exactly the way it needed to be run. Vasquez, Howe said. It wasn't a question, she had clearly read the operational log. Yes, ma'am. Note that in your report. Already done, Claire said. Ethan found her at 10:30, sitting alone in the briefing room that had started all of this 26 hours ago. She had the worn black patch on the table in front of her, not wearing it, just looking at it. The ghost. Actual stitching faded at the edges, carrying the particular texture of something that had been handled every day for 6 years. He sat down across from her, not beside her this time. Across. Because this was a different kind of conversation than the one they'd had at midnight, and they both felt the difference without naming it. Howe offered you the review lead, he said. Vasquez had overheard enough of the call to brief the team in broad strokes. Yes. You said yes. Yes. He looked at her for a moment. It's going to take months. Longer, she said, if we do it right. You'll do it right. Yes, she said simply. I will. He looked at the patch. Can I ask you something? He said. You've been asking me things for the last 8 hours, she said. Don't stop now. A small pause. Almost a smile. The 31 hours you worked before the Richardson operation. The first time you earned the call sign. He paused. Were you angry that your concerns were dismissed? That you had to go over people's heads twice to be heard? Claire picked up the patch. Turned it in her hands the way Ethan had turned it differently, though. Not examining it. Feeling it. I was afraid, she said. Not angry. Fear is cleaner than anger. Anger wants someone to blame. Fear just wants the problem solved. She paused. I was afraid the team would deploy before I finished. I was afraid of being right too slowly. That's the fear you mentioned last night, the same one you carry. The same fear, Ethan said. The same fear, she agreed. Different battlefield. He was quiet for a moment. I owe you something I don't know how to give, he said. Not just an apology, something bigger than that. You don't owe me anything, Claire said. Claire, you don't, she said. What you gave me today is worth more than anything you owe me. She looked at him. You said my name on that JSOC report, correctly, with everything it means attached. She paused. Do you know how many years I worked without anyone saying my name that way in a room that mattered? Ethan looked at the table. Too many, he said. Too many, she agreed. But today happened. That's not nothing, Ethan. That's actually everything. He raised his eyes. She was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her face in a very long time. Maybe not since they were children, since before deployments and distance, and the slow accumulation of years that take people apart, without anyone deciding that's what should happen. An expression that was not forgiveness, because forgiveness implies a debt, and Claire Walker did not deal in debts. It was something older and more primary than that. Recognition. She was looking at him the way she had always looked at him before he stopped looking back with equal attention. The way a sister looks at a brother she has always loved and has now also been seen by. You're my brother, she said. That never stopped, even when you couldn't see me. She paused. But now you can, and I'd like to see where that goes. Ethan looked at his sister. He said, I'd like that too. 3 weeks later, the formal review began. Claire's team was 7 analysts selected by her from across 3 agencies, each chosen for the specific combination of skills that the review required. She briefed them on day 1 with the same efficiency she brought to every brief, clear, fast, no wasted words. She gave them the scope, the methodology, the standards she expected, and one instruction that was not in any standard review protocol. Every operation in this review had people in it, she said. Operators' advisors support personnel contractors on the right side. Some of them are alive, some of them aren't. Whatever we find in these records, whether it's exculpatory, whether it changes the official account of what happened, whether it's information that families have been waiting years to have, that information gets to the right people. Completely. Without reduction. She paused. That's not secondary to this review. That is this review. Her team looked at her. One of them, a young signals analyst named Torres, first major review, 26 years old. The kind of person who had chosen intelligence work because he believed in what it was supposed to accomplish. Asked, what if what we find is difficult for the institution? What if accurate findings create political problems? Claire looked at him. Our job is accurate findings, she said. Managing the political problems is someone else's job. We do our job. We trust that the truth serves people better than the comfortable version of events. A pause. Always. Torres nodded. The review started. On the 41st day of the review, Claire found the Kandahar operation in the files. She had known it was coming. She had flagged it in her preliminary scope as one of the 17 minimum operations requiring review based on its timeline correlation to the Veridan access history. She had assigned it to herself not because she couldn't trust another analyst with it, but because she had made a promise. She spent 11 hours on it. At the end of 11 hours, she had the complete picture. The Kandahar operation had been run on a corrupted intelligence package. The terrain mark that Reyes's spotter had been navigating by the one that had been physically altered, the one Reyes had mentioned in the dark outside CIN-7, was altered based on false positioning data that had entered the intelligence stream through a Veridan-adjacent channel. The alteration was deliberate. The false data had been placed specifically to create the exposure that resulted in the loss of Reyes's spotter. It was not fog of war. It was manufactured. Claire sat with that for a moment. Then she wrote the finding, completely, without reduction. Then she called Reyes. He answered on the second ring. She told him what she had found. She used plain language, not clinical, not bureaucratic, but the specific kind of plain language that respects a person enough to give them the truth without dressing it up in professional distance. She told him what the false data was, how it entered the stream, what it caused. She told him his spotter's death was not random, not inevitable, not the acceptable cost of operating in an imperfect intelligence environment. Reyes was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had the quality it had in the dark. Outside CIN7, the quality of a man doing internal accounting, but this time with different numbers than the ones he'd been running for 7 years. He didn't make a mistake, Reyes said. No, Claire said. He didn't. I spent 7 years thinking that maybe if we'd been more careful. No, Claire said again. The error was upstream. It was deliberate. It was placed. She paused. Your team was as careful as it was possible to be with the information you had. A long pause. The families, Reyes said. His wife. The findings go to the families, Claire said. Complete, unredacted. That was my instruction to this review from day one. Another pause. Thank you, Reyes said. His voice was thick with something that was not weakness, but weight, the specific weight of 7 years of a question that finally had an answer, landing all at once. Thank you for asking me to do this, Claire said. The night outside CIN7, when you asked me to make sure the record showed what actually happened. I didn't know if you'd be able to, he said. I know, Claire said. But I told you I would. Yes, Reyes said quietly. You did. Ethan heard about the Kandahar finding through the review's official summary. He called Claire that night. She answered on the first ring. The Kandahar finding, he said. Yes. Reyes. I called him this morning, Claire said. He needed to hear it directly. A pause. How is he? Processing, she said. It's the right kind of processing, though. The kind that comes from finally knowing instead of not knowing. Another pause. That's what the truth does when you give it to people correctly. It doesn't make the loss smaller, but it changes the shape of it. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You're very good at this, he said. Not the professional this, not the analysis, not the intelligence architecture, not the review methodology. He meant the human this. The work of bringing difficult truths to people who need them without breaking the people in the process. It took a long time to learn, Claire said. I believe that. The first few years I was too clinical, she said. I thought professional distance was protective. It's not. It's just distance. A pause. Distance doesn't help people. Presence does. You've been present for a long time, Ethan said. For strangers, she said. Yes. The pause that followed was the specific kind that forms between two people when one of them has said something that names the thing neither of them had fully named before. Not for me, Ethan said. Not for you, Claire agreed. Not in the way I should have been. I kept my distance too, from you. Another pause. I thought if I asked you to see me clearly, and you couldn't, it would hurt more than not asking. Claire. I know, she said. I know you would have looked, if I'd asked. She paused. We were both protecting ourselves from each other, and calling it something more dignified. Ethan exhaled slowly. What do we do about that? What we're already doing, Claire said. We talk, we show up, we stop protecting ourselves from each other. A pause. I'll start. Here's something I've never told you. When you deployed the first time I was 17, I went to the library every day because it was the only place I could think without someone asking me if I was okay. I started reading intelligence analysis textbooks because I wanted to understand the world you were moving through. I wanted to be able to see what you were seeing even from a distance. She paused. That's why I do this work. Because of you. Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then, I didn't know that. You never asked, she said simply. Not as a criticism, just as a fact. I'm asking now, he said. I know, Claire said. That's why I told you. 6 months after Operation Black Horizon, the formal review completed. 21 operations reviewed. 11 confirmed as having been affected by corrupted intelligence from the Veridon program. Findings delivered to 8 families. 3 official records corrected. 4 ongoing investigations opened based on evidence surfaced in the review. Deputy Director Rourke was indicted on 11 counts. Marsh on 7. The Veridon network, which turned out to have international financing with 3 source organizations, was systematically dismantled across 14 months by a team working from Claire's original analysis framework. At the formal review completion briefing, General Howe said something that went into the official record. The disruption of the Veridon program, the protection of CIN-7, the identification of corrupted operations, the delivery of accurate findings to affected families. This work began with a single analyst who looked at a mission package that no one else questioned and asked the right question. A pause. Dr. Claire Walker Ghost Actual is the reason this review exists. She is the reason 11 operations have accurate records. She is the reason families who had been living with incomplete truths about how they lost someone are now living with the complete truth. Another pause. Her work should be the institutional standard, not the exception. Claire was in the room when Howe said it. She didn't look around for validation. She didn't compose her face into an expression of appropriate modesty. She just sat with it, the specific, unfamiliar experience of having the work that had always been invisible, named in a room that mattered by a person with the authority to make the naming permanent. It felt, she thought, like being seen. Across the room, Ethan was watching her. When their eyes met, he didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't reach for any of the gestures that perform an emotion instead of containing it. He just looked at her with the open, uncomplicated attention of a man who had learned later than he should have how to look at his sister. She looked back. That was enough. The week after the briefing. Ethan flew in from his next assignment, 2 days of leave, deliberately scheduled, a thing that Ethan Walker had not done for personal reasons in 4 years. They ate dinner at a restaurant that Claire chose, which meant it was quiet, and the food was actual rather than performative, and the lighting didn't demand anything from anyone. They talked for 3 hours. Not about the review. Not about the program, or the investigation, or the institutional aftermath of everything that had started in a briefing room with a worn black patch and a commander's laughter. They talked about everything else. About their parents. About the years in between. About what Ethan had seen on his deployments and what Claire had seen in hers, the invisible ones, the ones conducted in classified facilities in front of screens. At one point, Ethan said, "I've been trying to figure out how to say something, and I keep not being able to find the right words." "Try the wrong ones," Claire said. "I'll translate." He almost laughed. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not because of what you did on the operation, not because of the review, or the Rourke finding, or any specific thing you accomplished." He paused. "I'm proud of who you are, of how you built yourself. I was gone for most of it. I was deployed. I was focused on my own work. I wasn't present the way I should have been. And while I was doing all of that, you built something extraordinary without any of the scaffolding I had. No team around you. No visible victories. No one telling you what you were doing mattered." Another pause. "You just kept doing it because you knew it was right. That's..." He stopped. "That's the most disciplined thing I've ever seen." Claire looked at her brother across the restaurant table. This was the conversation she had been waiting for, without knowing she was waiting for it for longer than she could calculate. "You had a team," she said. "I had a call sign." "Ghost Actual," he said. "Ghost Actual," she agreed. It was enough. Ethan picked up his glass, set it down, looked at her with the full attention that had cost both of them so much time to arrive at. "I want to be part of your team," he said. "Not your commander, not your older brother who thinks he knows what you're capable of. Your team." He paused. "If you'll have me." Claire looked at him for a long moment. "You've been on my team," she said quietly, "since the day you deployed and I walked into that library and started reading about the world you were in." A pause. "You just didn't have your credentials yet." Ethan said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that, and he was learning slowly with the same discipline Claire had always applied to difficult things, that sometimes the right response to being understood is to stop talking and let yourself be understood. He picked up his glass. She picked up hers. They sat together in the particular silence of two people who have crossed a distance that most people never close and arrived finally at the same place. The work ahead was long. The review's conclusions were still reverberating through agencies and command structures and family living rooms, where people were reading findings that changed the shape of losses they'd been carrying for years. The network built around Veridon was still being dismantled. The institutional reforms that General Howe had tasked Claire's analysis framework to inform were still being written. There was so much still to do. But the person who had spent 12 years doing invisible work in invisible rooms had been seen. Not discovered. Not uncovered. Seen. And that made all the difference between a ghost who moved through the world, unrecognized, and a person who changed it.